everybody.
Hi.
I'm Ellie Shore, and welcome to Art Salon. Our guest tonight is Ann Nava, who is a fascinating artist in both paints and sculpture and ceramics. The name of her talk is Bad Children, Blessed Beasts, which I find intriguing. She describes herself as a contemporary folk artist. She's been in Florida since about 1980 and is very well known in Miami and in Fort Lauderdale. Not so much in Palm Beach County, but we're going to meet her tonight. Take it away, Joanne.
All right. Hey, thank you for coming. I'm going to start at the end, and then I'm going to go to the beginning. The end is that this is my most recent series. It's called Bad Children, Blessed Beasts. And the theory of this is, the notion is that children of humans are more evil than animals, adult animals, because adult animals are pure in their intent and their nature. And children have free will, and they're human, and they have to have a self-awareness to improve themselves. And they don't usually have it. They're mischievous, and they're dark sometimes, and they're mean sometimes. So the whole thing is a play on the sanctity of animals. And before this series, I did a different series called Sanctification of Wildlife. So this is like a thread that comes into this. So this was at the Cultural Council. I had just moved to Palm Beach County, and this show was a way of introducing myself to Palm Beach County. When I moved to Lake Worth 3 years ago, I saw the space of the Cultural Council, and I thought, I want a solo show there. And I didn't know what I was going to show. And then I met Joyce Brown, who I had no idea who she was, and she told me she was opening up a ceramic studio to work. And I thought, well, I wanted to go there. And then I made these clay pieces and did this show, and that was like the start of a whole new life for me. So that was that. And that is in Lake Worth on F Street, and it's like 4,000 square feet of clay working studio, which is amazing. So this is high school work. So now I'm going back to the beginning. When I was in high school, I decided I wanted to be a fine artist my whole life. And I was so stubborn and rigid that no matter what happened, this is what I was going to do. So this is the centerfold of the Creative Writing magazine our senior year in high school. And I was intrigued by Salvador Dali and the Post-Impressionists. So I did this figure, and there are faces hidden in this pencil drawing all through. And what I found that is if I did surrealism, people were impressed by it in high school because I didn't have to be exact. I could warp it and deform it. It made me look like I was a much better artist than I actually was. So that's why I was doing it. And here's another one that was in there. So I pretty much illustrated the whole magazine, and that was my high school stuff. After high school, I wanted to go to art school, but I sort of got sidetracked because it wasn't really available to me. So I dropped out of college 3 times and had to figure out how to make a living off of art with no academic training. And really, my passion was so much stronger than my knowledge that it was hard. So I moved to Florida in 1982. I had been doing art, teaching art in schools, teaching art at the YMCA, always trying to learn new techniques. And I moved to Florida, and there's an ad in the paper. We need artists to volunteer to do murals in South Florida State Hospital entry ward. Like it was this huge rec area. So I go there, and they tell me they're going to get me a whole crew from Fort Lauderdale Art Institute. And all I have to do is design, because I was the only one that showed up. Well, they never gave me anybody else. Nobody showed up. And they're telling me I have to do it in house paint, which I'd never worked. I was an oil painter. So I start doing this huge wildlife mural in house paint. Never did a mural in my life. Had only done like 20 paintings in my entire life. And so there I am painting this huge mural. It was all Florida wildlife. It sort of looked like a Victorian theater lobby. And then in the hallways of the hospital, I did giant flowers like botanicals, and I got them all out of this antique book from 1923, photographs of antique flowers, and I copied them from there. So you had these giant botanical flowers going up and down the halls. And the patients would tell me, because they were hallucinating when they'd come in, that the flowers were jumping off the wall and flirting through the air. And it's you know, and so I was happy about that. They were like freaking out in my mural. So I was there for 3 months. I was homeless at the time, living in an abandoned house with no electricity. And I had a doctor's bag. I would get to the hospital carrying my brushes and these clothes with this hat and this weird getup. And the patients here used to call me that little hobo lady. And they would do things to try to get my attention, like throw a chair across the room or act crazy, and to see, and they go, we want to see if you react, you know? So that was my stint at South Florida State Hospital. It took me like 3 months. So when I finished it, the director of the Cultural Council at that time came and photographed me doing it, and he wrote this whole article about me. And then I received the award for Art in Public Places for Broward County, which was a big surprise. So I thought, oh, now I'm a real artist. I'm painting in house paint murals, and they gave me an award. Maybe something good's going to happen after that. But nothing happened. You know, it's just 3 months given away. OK, so then my sister coined the phrase latchkey children. And she wrote the book, Handbook for Latchkey Children and Their Parents. She toured the country on talk shows. And she said to me, I want to write the children's version. And I had always wanted to be a children's book writer and illustrator and get the Caldecott Award. That was my high school notion. Oh, I'll just go get the Caldecott Award. I didn't even know how to draw, OK? So it's my fantasy. So my sister says to me, you're going to illustrate the book, and then we're going to go on tour with it. So I made sample illustrations. We got accepted for publication. And I had to knock out like 65 illustrations, and the publisher wanted them done with Flair pen on typing paper. Do you know how hard it is to draw with a Flair pen on typing paper? You can't make a mistake. There's nothing to work with because they wanted to be able to transfer them to print. So I did this whole series, and they were very simple drawings that the kids could color in, like a coloring book with colored pencils. And this was the title page, the 2 pages, On My Own, it was called. And it was instruction to kids of how to function independently if they were home without their parents. So that was a big project for me, to meet the deadlines, format the book. And it was a fantasy to get a published book as an illustrator. So then I started working on a children's book that I wrote. I never really finished it. I had sent it to 10 publishers, but without an agent, they won't look at it. So this was more into my children's illustration thing. The reason I'm showing you that I had a great interest in children's books and children's illustrators is because it ties back into the Bad Children, Blessed Beasts, the whimsical, childlike stuff, and then the surrealism. So I like the dark and I like the whimsical, so it all ties together for me. So after I did all this, I went to get a job, and I got a job marbleizing tables for a furniture factory. I'm like 30 years old. I have a 2-year-old child. I'm marbleizing tables, and I meet this artist. I just moved to Florida. His name is Don Shearer. He recently had a retrospective at the Box Gallery. He was the first person I met in Florida. So I come in. I'm a 30-year-old woman with a kid. He didn't want anything to do with me. He didn't want me to get hired. He snubbed me. And he wouldn't teach me how to marbleize a table. I'd ask him, how do you do it? He goes, you figure it out. So after a while, we sort of connected, and I started doing the marble with him. And he taught me how to faux marble. And Don Shearer was born a master artist. It was like working with Andy Warhol. He's just a phenomenal guy. And we became best of friends. So one time, we were marbleizing a table. And I was getting paid so little to do this that I said, you know what? They're really treating us badly here. These tables are selling for $15,000 a piece, and I'm getting $5 an hour. He goes, you're right. So we used to tie rags on ourselves, jump on the tables, and hold union signs like Norma Ray, and just try to get them to raise our salaries. So I said, Don, we got to do something with this. I said, when I was in high school, I had to decorate the whole gym with paper for murals for the prom. I said, I arranged the Bilbo Baggins cave, the stones, in the pattern of my name. So I signed the whole gym and nobody knew it. I said, let's do this on this marbleized table. He goes, okay. So we made the marble table total erotica. We had the stretched out veins. We had the stretched out veins, naked people doing odd things, words, and you couldn't see it. But it was like the erotica Rosetta Stone. So we felt like the people, this was the 80s, we felt like, and it was gorgeous. You couldn't tell looking at it. I mean, we did the most beautiful faux marble you ever saw. Because Don Shearer taught me. We were doing it all day talking, stretching the lines. Oh, let's. So we would imagine, because this is the 80s in Florida, that the cocaine cowboys were buying these tables for their yachts. So we were imagining them doing a line of coke and then discovering one, and then the whole thing would unravel. So I wonder where this table is today, you know? So, but this thing of hiding messages in the art that's going to public places continues throughout my whole career, because this was like a mischievous thing Don and I got into. But he taught me how to do faux. So then I was teaching art at a private school, and he calls me up and he says, Joanne, what are you doing? I said, I'm teaching art at a private school. He goes, quit. I go, what do you mean quit? He goes, I got the perfect job for us. Just like I told you, Liz, right? He goes, I got the perfect job for us. You got to quit. I'm hand painting fabric for this crazy lady that used to be a great interior designer, and she started this hand painted fabric company, and she'll let us do whatever we want. Just come over here, I'll get you a job. So I go over there. She's got a cigarette. She looks like Zsa Zsa Gabor. And she's like, okay, Don, who is this? And he goes, this is Joanne. She used to do faux marble with me. She goes, do a sample on chintz. So she goes out to walk her show dogs. I'm standing there petrified. And I go to Don, I can't do this. He goes, you can do it. Just do the sample. I go, I can't do it. You do it. He goes, okay, I'll do it. So he does my sample. She comes in, and she goes, she looks at it. What do you think, Don? He goes, I think it's all right. So they hire me. We're doing 20 yards of chintz at a time, hand-painted fabric, hand-painted floral prints, designing the line. And it got to the point where after 5 years, he had left. I was the head artist. I'm designing the line. I'm painting 40 yards of fabric for people like Carnival Cruise Line, Boca Country Club, Connie Chung's yacht. I did Charlie Sheen's bedspread. And at one point, we were doing Bill Cosby's house when he was Dr. Huxtable, before he was who he is now. So we were doing the fabric for his couch. And it was a floral, Don and I were. And I said, Don, and we're doing the floral, hand doing it. I said, Renee's signing her name for this. She has nothing to do with this. How dare her sign her name to us? And he goes, yep. He's on the other side of the table. Yep, you're right, you're right. So we decided to hide messages and names in the hyacinths, in the floral. So we start writing, hi, Bill. This is Joe and Don painting your fabric. And we imagined that someday he would be interviewed on TV and we'd see our names going behind him on the fabric, but it never happened. But we were always hiding messages in the stuff we were doing, and we always got away with it. So it was kind of funny. So while working at the same place, Don was very competitive, and there were 3 of us, Brian, Don, and I. So one time when Renee was out of town, she had 3 beautiful bar stools with backs, very expensive, and Don says, we're each painting one, and we'll see whose is the best. And we said, okay, so we each took a chair to the corner. Brian did mermaids, divided in the middle. It was like a gorgeous pattern with mermaids, and half of the chair was one color, half the other, with silver. The mermaids were just in silver. I did Lascaux caves, because I used to be into petroglyphs when I lived in the Southwest, and I was always studying ancient art. So I did Lascaux caves, and Don painted his stool, zebra stripes, put a pink heart on it, and wrote Love Slave. So he said to us, I won. And I just looked at him like, are you kidding? So my chair, when the owner saw it, said, give me 6 yards of that on fabric. So I did, and then it got picked up for an ad for Architectural Digest, and I pulled the magazine and showed it to him. I said, who won? And it was just like, it was like a good joke for us. But it was such a thrill to see my bison. And we did a lot of this for upholstery on yachts, and I had a coordinating fabric that didn't have the bison. It just had the cave walls, and there were metallics in it and ground metals, and it was really a lot of fun to work there. So as I was going along, when Don and I would be painting across the table from each other, he would say to me, Joe, someday we're going to be painting in these rich people's houses. We're going to be doing things for them, and they're going to be telling them, and they're going to be flying us around, and they're going to pay us big money. And he says, this is the way we're going to do it. And we'd be painting across the table, and he had to tell me the same story. I'm going to do 20 pieces of art, big pieces like folding screens and accessories and beautiful things for these homes. And then put them in a showroom at Dakota, designer showroom, and then we're going to, and I just listened and listened and listened. Then he left and went to Boston. And when he left, I quit the job, and I did it. I did everything he told me, very important mentor. So this was my first folding screen, and it was done with a hollow core door and a pair of bifold doors, and then like pressed wood cutouts, and it was called Holy Ibis. And it ended up in a staging for Florida Home and Garden magazine and an architect's home. So that was another serendipitous thing that reinforced me. But it was also the first time I treated animal life in a holy way. And that's what that's about, so it's the link. So as part of my line for the interior design trade, I started doing a series of Audubons, because I was a big fan of Audubon work. And I did them the size of the elephant folio, approximately like 40 by 30 inches. And I had them on the back of canvas, and I did them almost like a detailed watercolor, and they had a pole, and they hung like a tapestry. And I figured I was selling them at the time for like $1,500 a piece, so I gave myself 3 days a piece to finish them in order to think of it like a business, like how much do I have to make a day? And I did like 4 of them and sold them, and then I was doing them on wood, big ones, and selling them. And there's a collection of them at Twist Nightclub in Miami, and the first bar they have, because I created an Audubon Room there. And a lot of my Audubon paintings are still there. But I love doing those. They were just really a lot of fun to do. This was another screen in my series. It's from the Greek pottery pieces, and it's on wood. And these pieces sold very quickly, but they were a lot of work. My background, as well as loving fine art, I always loved the Field Museum in Chicago, and it's my favorite museum. I'd rather go there than the Art Institute. The things you would see there were just mind-boggling. The Field Museum had all this ancient culture art, and the art of ancient cultures interested me so much that I would always try to copy it because I knew I couldn't afford to buy it. So I was always making replicas from a young age, like trying to fake things, making my house look like a museum. I painted Lascaux caves on my first apartment with watercolor and soap so I could wash it off later. I was always trying to create this fake environment. So that's why these things were so fascinating to me. I went through a point where I was taking roofing tile fragments that I find in the garbage, and I would paint them like fragments from old tombs and stuff, and my husband was a Finnish carpenter, and he'd box them like museum boxes, and I was selling them like relics, and that was another thing I was selling. It's like fake artifacts, and they looked so real. I mean, and he was such a good cabinet maker. So everything was about, I thought the rich can have anything they want, but they can't own part of King Tut's tomb, so I'm going to make it and sell it. So that was my concept. And it was also, you have to remember, the late 80s, early 90s. It's like the beginning of that age of romanticism that came in, that I think of it like that. Okay, so then the next piece that I did, this shows a lot of the textile influence, if you look at the background behind them. But as I was looking for images to create, I looked in an art history book, and there was an image that was very primitive, just a drawing. It was called Feeding the Oryx. And it's from 2500 BC, and it's from a tomb in mid-Egypt. And the person that discovered the tomb is the same person, Carter, I think his name, who discovered Tut's tomb. And I saw this image, and I thought it was an example of the first foreshortening and the layering to show perspective. This was like a groundbreaking piece as far as putting things higher and lower to show if something's further away, and layering. So I thought, I'm going to take this historic art history image and make it into a decorative screen. So I enhanced it, I fleshed it out, I did a faux ebony and ivory inlay. The background is like one of the textiles I would have done. And you got to remember, I have no academic training, so I was doing my own research and discovering these things that any Art 101 person would have known, but to me, I was like always discovering. And I took this to a showroom at Dakota, where I was showing my work at the time, and there was another showroom in Miami I was in, and I gave them a book with a photo of it, because they had a little catalog. It sold 3 times in one day. So everybody that saw the picture wanted it, and that piece sold. So I had to do 2 more from the picture. So I did 3 of them, and then I ripped the pictures up and threw them away because I didn't want to have to do it again. But I think now, if I had taken the image and sent it to China and had them reproduce them, they'd be in every home goods store in America now. But that was like my most successful piece as far as sales go. Everybody wanted one. This is from when I was doing people's homes, and this is not even completed. But I was constantly busy with my business. I'd have 12 clients waiting at a time for me to come to their house. This is, I think, in Turnberry Towers. And she had a bar, a granite bar, and she wanted a mural. The wall was already that green. She wanted a mural behind the bar. So I did giant Manhattans and martinis, so they looked, when you were across the room, like they were sitting on the bar. It lined up with the granite. So this is like unfinished, but they had metallics for where the bourbon would be. That's actually copper. And the stems are gold of the cherry, so when you walked through, it was actually a metallic. So I was doing these giant decorative kind of things. This house, she wanted me to make the whole house look like Tuscany, so I got an assistant to do a lot of the ragging on the walls, and then I did all the borders. I painted every piece of furniture. And so that was the kind of thing, the 90s. It's like went from house to house creating these environments, the romantic age of the 90s, you know. when all the Merchant Ivory films were going on and everything was about. I thought these turned out particularly, I was happy with this, with the fruit, and all of it was like natural wood from wood yew. It wasn't expensive furniture. This was, I was doing a lot of antique restoration, and this was an old pine piece. And I took the fabric design from a Swedish textile that was in a museum pinned on the wall, and I reproduced it on the doors of the cabinet. It was really fun. And at that time, I was doing a lot of 18th century renovation of pine furniture and milk paints and caissons, and that's where I learned to use those materials. I would have to match the restored things in Miami. I would take a train down there to Bond and Ashley Antiques, and 2 days a week, and they'd line up all the stuff, and I'd have to match the stuff where they replaced pieces with the original artists, and it would be dated like 1770 or something. I would just shake. It was so thrilling to match it. And that's where I learned how to use milk paints and waxes. So I did that for a few years with them. But originally, when they were given my name, they said, "Do you do faux bois?" And I said, "Sure." I didn't even know what it was. So the piece arrives. I would always say yes, because I had no training, and then I would figure it out. So they said faux bois. I go, "Well, I used to speak French. That means fake wood." Okay. So when it came, I saw that there was graining missing. So I did it, and then they came, picked it up, and they said, "Okay." And that's when I started going and doing that. So this is another, I did the black chairs, and I did the cabinet, the inside, the outside. He used to own a restaurant on Lincoln Road, and I did a lot of things for his house. Okay, so then we come to Twist Nightclub. Anybody familiar with the nightclub Twist on South Beach on Washington and 11th? Well, when they were going to open Twist, my stuff was in Miami, and they wanted to do this whole faux marble thing in there. So somebody gave them, they had seen my work, so they called me in. They were going to hire a man who was from England, European trained, I forget his name, and he said he would faux marble this big pillar for $200 a square foot. I walked in and I said, "I'll faux marble that whole pillar for $200. And they said, "Give us samples." So I did a whole presentation about the way I would do the club, and my concept was 18th century whorehouse France. And I did a lot of faux marble and gold leaf and these rubbed out walls, nicotine stained rose dusty brocades, and they hired me. And I had that marble pillar done in 2 days, because you got to remember, I was doing 40 hours of faux marble a day. It was no big deal to me. And the second year, this is the second year, I decided that the French whorehouse was a little rough. When I'd go there to the club at night, I go, "This is a little harsh. I'm going to do something really gentle next year." So the next year I told them I was doing L. Leslie Brooke fairy tales on the wall in charcoal, and I wanted it to look like the nursery had been on fire and there were smoke stains, because all the guys in 1994 were wearing Doc Marten boots, and everybody would put their foot on the wall like this, and the walls would get all black at the bottom. So I started out with them black at the bottom and made it look like they had been on fire and it was stained, and that the walls had been peeled away, and all of these were found. And it really looked good when you saw this at night and everybody's dressed in black with music going, and then behind them you see these distressed children's book illustrations. It was a really magical place. There's another one of 3 different twists I did. Pompeii, I did 1 year Olivia's Garden, and I did gold leaf tangerine trees on caviar black walls. It was gorgeous. And then another year I did the pottery, red and black pottery, Greek pottery. I reproduced them life-size of the warriors going, each section was a different piece of pottery that I documented. And I was upstairs painting, and the bar 1 was open downstairs, and I could hear them talking about me down in bar 1 while I'm painting upstairs. And they'd call me that girl or that artist lady. They go, "The artist lady is painting the warriors on the wall." And they were all naked figures of the bow and this. She said, "They have said she's making the penises too small." And I could hear this, and I'm like, and I was like, and they were going on and on in bar 1. I could hear them down there. They didn't realize I'm up there painting. So I kept changing the size of the penises until they stopped. I was just like always adjusting it. And it was just like ridiculous. So they would pick on me, you know, because they didn't think I should even be there. So I had a kid, you know, and I'm just some lady coming from Fort Lauderdale. But I did it for 15 years. I recreated this nightclub every year for 15 years. These are 2 of the covers I had of Wire magazine. This is 10 years of staying in style. It shows like different things. And the 10th year I did a tribute to Murrow. And this one was one that you saw, that mural I did with the glass. I reproduced that in a very modern art way. So every year I would change it. Like 1 year I did Chihuly. Another year, so I copied his paintings all over the place. And I would design stained glass windows for the place. I'd pick the napkins. One year I did Picasso, one year. So I would change it, and then we'd have an opening night, and 1,000 people would show up. And we had velvet ropes. And it would be like my night, but nobody knew it because I was the only woman there. So everybody looked at me like, oh, okay. But I'd look at it to see how it played out because it was such a thrill to work there. And I became such good friends in 15 years with the people that own Twist. They're like my brothers. And they would just trust me to come up with a concept. The last year I did it, probably it was 2008. And one of my closest friends was dying of pancreatic cancer. So I was in the hospital with her. And she said to me, what are you doing for Twist this year? And she was a Buddhist, and her whole house was full of Buddhas. And I said, I think I'm going to do a Buddhist theme, a Tibetan Buddhist cave temples that they had just recently discovered in the mountains. And she said, good, 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 let's do it. And so we were designing it as she was dying. So I go to the owners of Twist, and I go, we're doing Buddhist Nepal cave temples that were discovered. And they go, we're not doing religion in here. And they argued with me. I said, Buddhism isn't a religion, it's an attitude, and I don't know what I'm talking about. And then I convinced them of this. And so I made the bar. So I had a friend who cooked for the Dalai Lama. He was a strict Buddhist. Eric, his name was. And I told him I was doing this, and I said, I want you to look things over and make sure I'm not interpreting things wrong. And he was ignoring me. He was such a snob. He was just ignoring me. And so I get to the club that night, and he looks at me, he goes, do you know what you did here? You created a High Lama shrine in this bar. He goes, we could do this all over the country, Buddha bars. I go, no, we're not doing this. No, we're not doing this. But I had all the bartenders wearing orange sarongs, wearing Tibetan beads. We had incense everywhere. And that was the final year. That was the final year I did it. But it was a tribute to my friend Lynn, and they did it. And I said, you guys don't understand that Buddhism is now becoming a trend. It's just becoming trend. It was right at the beginning of that. I said, everybody's going to love this theme. It's going to be magical, and you're going to be the first ones to have it. And I had over the bar a canopy of lotus blossoms, like vines and vines, a canopy. And so when you sat at the bar and looked up, the whole thing was lotus. But I had to make a stencil and do it upside down and all this kind of stuff. So that's Twist. Now, every year when we'd have our opening, they'd put out a CD, and they'd have the top DJ in Miami at the time make the CD, and they'd take segments of my mural, and they'd use it for the cover. So I have so many CDs that have my designs on the cover. I love that one. That was year 10. That was my favorite year for Twist. Okay, this is another restaurant that I did, The Field. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's in Dania. It's the highest rated Irish pub in South Florida. It's huge house, all wood and all these meandering rooms. Everything's made from scratch. They have Irish Rovers play there, and they have all this great music. And they have like 18 of my paintings, and I did the sign for outside, and they used it on their menu cover. So that was a big project for me. But all of these jobs, you have to remember, I have no academic training, so I'd have to adapt my style to whatever I was doing. So I would research and copy and research and copy. These are some of the homes I did. This one, it was in Westlake Worth. This one was in Hollywood, but they didn't have a backsplash in their kitchen. And I did the whole kitchen. I'm not even showing you the rest of it. But I said, you don't have a backsplash. It was just drywall. I said, I'm going to paint tile there. So I painted tile on the back so it would look like they had a backsplash. So these were the kind of, and this, they chose this Tuscan image, and there was another fridge. So whatever people would give me to do, I would just adapt. This one, the trompe-l'oeil stuff was popular. When I'd paint furniture for people, I'd paint something laying there like a letter or keys or that kind of thing. It was a lot of fun to do. This is more furniture, faux marble. This was just like a regular wood brand new table. So I burrow wooded it and did faux marble. Close up of some other furniture painting that was all just plain wood. These are just more pieces at that time period. The silk in the background is all hand painted silk, hand dyed. I was doing workshops at Bonnet House Museum for like 3 years of how to paint furniture, so really a lot of fun. We had the classes in Island Theater, so you had to take this rickety-rackety bridge that swung with your paints over to this little room where they used to show their home movies when the Bartletts lived there. And there'd be monkeys in the trees outside, so it was very romantic to teach classes there. And everybody would bring a piece of wood and thing, and I would teach them how to do a hand-painted thing for furniture. Okay, so while all this is going on, my friend Don, back to my big mentor, he's telling me about these contests and things like the Horde exhibition competition at Fort Lauderdale Museum. And he says, you have to enter the Horde. It's the biggest show of the year. It's like the biggest deal. And I'm like, okay. So in '87, I painted this. It's 4 feet by 4 feet. It's called Bless These Hats. And I entered it in the Horde, and it got in. And I was thrilled to have a piece in a museum show of this level. I was shocked. And I took this from a Max Ernst painting called The Hat Makes the Man. And he had all these hats going all directions. So I picked 3 hats that I liked, copied them on this black background, did these gold leaf flowers to sort of take off on my textile days. And the notion of this was, this goes back into my whole fantasy thing, is that the hats, because he said the hats make the man, so what I was saying was that these hats are holy hats. And when you put these hats on, they create a state of enlightenment automatically. It's like a little thing, like you pick up the hat, you put it on, and you're like there. So, and the rabbit is the one that made them that way. The rabbit had jumped out of the hats, left behind this essence of awareness, and so anybody that put these hats on. In the painting, there's a little photograph of my sister and my cousin and I wearing birthday hats. So then that's a tie-in for the future too. I just slapped it on there to give this a more contemporary feel of here's these children in birthday hats that are cones, which comes in later. This is another second one in that series. This one's called The Angel and the Monkey. It's, again, 4 feet by 4 feet. And the message, because this was like my Holy Card series, and the message of this painting was that we are the angels like monkeys are to us. Like our awareness of what existence is to an angel being would be like a monkey's awareness of what our life is. That's like the difference of level. So the angel is approaching this monkey, which is us, that's red hot with its own passions and distractions, playing an accordion nervously. And the angel's just presenting the message of love, which is like a letter of grace. So that was what that was about. This painting was purchased by the nightclub Twist, and it was in their pool room, oddly enough. And when they were redoing it, it went to the warehouse and somebody stole it. So I don't know where it is now, but it was purchased by them. This is the third in this series, called Beauty in All Things. And it was, in essence, about how every living creature has its own vibration and existence. It is equally sanctified. Like if you go to Jung, you would say that even a rock has it, and even this has it, because everything that has atoms has a vibration. We just don't understand it or see it or can hear it. But that's what this whole series is about. It was like reverence for all matter, not even things that breathe like us, but all matter. And that year I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and one of the things people were doing for that was taking evening primrose oil, which I still do take. So that's an evening primrose, that flower, so it's a healing plant to me, so I put it in the painting. This one is called The Boat Ride, and my mother had just died, and it's on wood, and I was going through a tough time, and I felt like I was emerging out of it. So it's like a self-portrait of me in a boat. All these are done in house paint, by the way, on wood, so they're very primitive. You don't get the fine point you get with oil paint. It's like painting with putty or pudding. And so that was, and it's just sort of like a tribute to John Pinkham Ryder. Do you remember the one with the racetrack with the horses going around? And I really loved his work, and I was sort of thinking, if he were going to do this painting, how would he do it with all those amber and black tones and materials that would fall off later with him? You know his story, and he just used whatever he had. And he ate whatever he had, too. He died of food poisoning, so. So time's going on. This is 1991 now. My stepson is living with me, my son, my husband, and my stepson has a friend named Michael Hutchison. And he's at our house all the time, extended family. And one day, Zach, my stepson, calls me from school and says, come pick me up. Michael's mother committed suicide. So I run to the school, pick him up, drop him off at Michael's house where Michael's mother had just shot herself in the head. And I went to my studio and I did this painting. And it's a portrait of Michael. And it's called A Mother's Death, A Cup of Milk. And it just emerged out of me. I didn't know if it was good or bad. I did it in house paint. And my husband said, you've really done something there. And I said, really? And he found this molding in the garbage. It was like from an old house. And he made a frame, which I think makes the piece. But A Mother's Death, A Cup of Milk, I never hang it because it's so, but it's the front piece for my retrospective show. So then I'm thinking to myself, I need to do a body of work. And I needed to do a body of work, partly because I was still doing decorative painting. My husband was diagnosed with a serious illness, so he could no longer work. I was supporting all these people, so I thought in addition to doing the decorative painting, I'm going to go back to fine art, because then I can sell fine art for more money if I get it there. So I'm clumsily deciding, what am I going to do for my first series? And I thought milk, because I'm taking care of everyone. And as a woman, you're always worried, did somebody drink all the milk tonight? Is there milk for the morning? Is there milk for the cereal? Is there milk for the coffee? You're always looking in there, because usually the men in the house don't care. They'll drink that last bit of milk. The morning comes, there's nothing. So milk is always an issue in a household when you're a woman. And so I started doing these, and this is a big, big painting. So I started doing big, oversized images of milk. This is called Richard's milk. He was the owner of Twist, and every morning he'd have a giant glass of milk with ice in it. And so I photographed his milk, and I did Richard's milk. And this is case seen on canvas, and it's really huge. It doesn't show well here, but it really was sort of photorealism. And then I had my first solo exhibition, which was milk and cake and cereal and all these things, and had some kind of dark edge to it also. So that was the first solo. And oddly enough, they wrote it up in the paper because it was just a different kind of subject matter. For the opening, they served little shot glasses of milk with little stacks of miniature Oreo cookies. And because I was saying that I thought that milk was the first communion, rather than giving the child wine, because the exchange between a mother and child, whether it's an animal or a person, of all mammals, is the exchange of milk. So I wanted milk to be the show about nurturing and feeding and healing. I thought it was an interesting message. That's another one from the milk series. It's a folding screen, and I wanted it to feel like you could just go over, sit there, and have a glass of milk. It's like life size. And it was like a stage set, and I wanted this painting to make you feel calm when you looked at it, like lower your blood pressure. Like I can go just sit there and have a glass of milk. That's another one. Yeah, that's so funny, because I sold that painting for more than I've ever sold a painting for in my life to a filmmaker, and it sold immediately. It was in an Art Basel show, and it sold immediately. Whenever I do anything of my son, that's my son. And this took like 10 minutes to do this painting. And when you do one of those, you know about this. When you do one of those magic paintings, they just pop. And I think we should hold on to those, because they don't happen all the time. But I love that one too. This one is called Public Milk, and I did it on wood. And my feeling was that when you go to buy milk, it doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, where you live, who you are, the milk is the same. Everybody has the same container on their table if they drink milk. It's the same thing. That could be in a country store, it could be in the ghetto, it could be in Publix. Public milk, it's milk for everybody. So it's like a universal language. It's a connector. This one is called City Milk. I was born in the South Bronx, and when I walked to school, I'd have to pass empty lots with wild dogs and packs and all this kind of stuff. This was my best friend for a while. We weren't really allowed to play together because she was colored. So my father had an issue with her coming to my house, of what the neighbors would think. But I loved her, Karen Samuels. She was the most popular girl in my class. So I did this as a tribute to her, walking her grocery cart through the empty lots with a gallon of milk. Back then it didn't look like that, but anyway. And my Scottish Terrier, I had to put him in. But this was done on a door, a hollow core door from Home Depot. And what I would do is I'd cover them in glue and wrap a sheet around them so they had the texture of fabric, so it wasn't like painting on wood. So you couldn't tell what it was. Lisa Lopez owns this. She's with the Culture Division. This is another one of those magic paintings. It's 4 feet, over 4 feet. And I worked on the canvas for 2 weeks trying to do a tribute to Jaco Pastorius, and kept failing miserably, very complicated painting. And so finally, after 2 weeks, 10 hours a day, I just whipped this out, and I went, oh. And I sold it to Virginia Fifield, if you know who she is. Yep. So she and her husband bought that instantly. And everywhere I went, because when I took that, I showed it once. And when it showed, as soon as I was taking it out of the house, my friend who was staying at my house said, that's not coming back if you show that. And everywhere I went, people had it on their phones because everybody was photographing it. So this is like the best painting I've ever done in my life. This is another one from that series. It's called Snack Tin. It's on a roofing tin, and I love this piece. And I sold it to George Gatson, and I tried to buy it back, and he wouldn't sell it. So This is another one from that Real Simple series. It's called Waiting for Cake. It's a small piece on wood. And here's the cake that goes with it. And these are all house paint. You got to remember it. I would get mistake colors from Home Depot, so it would force me to use colors I normally would not use. This one is a favorite of mine. It's called Cake for G. And you can't see it on this, but the crumbs of cake, I made it crack so that each crack is like the size of a grain of cake. And I found the wood on the side of the road and had a carpenter make the frame out of it. And that's property of Gregory Little now, if you guys know his work. This is a really gigantic one. It's like 5 feet by some. It was called titty cake because everybody said that's what it looked like. But it's another one in that cake series. And I wanted to do this with no detail, no shadow in the cake itself. So it's just almost like color by number, areas of color and shape, and see how that worked. And again, it's done in house paint on canvas. And then here I start going back to clay. I just had a hankering because in high school I had done 3 portraits in clay. And I just loved doing them so much that I never forgot that. And I was at ArtServe and I asked somebody there, is there any place I can work in clay? And they said, yeah, fire and mud. So I signed up for 1 month and I started making this birthday series. I didn't know what I was doing, but here they are. And I just loved them. And I made these long necks and I didn't know how to show them. So I cast concrete blocks and put rebar in them to make the stand. So they come off like puppet heads. But to me, I just fell in love with them. And I paint them with flat paints and enhance them. And there they are with their environment. And I was trying to create an environment for them to live in so that when they're shown. And this picture was taken at the Coral Springs Museum where they're showing now. Here's another one from the cake series. This one was stolen from a gallery during a show at Fat Village. It was like a 4-man show, and somebody had a key and they stole 2 of my big paintings of the birthdays. This one I really liked, and it tells a story, and the words that are highlighted jump out for a reason. I went to Publix to photograph the milk for the public milk, and this cake was on a pedestal in the bakery, and it had just been iced, and I wanted to photograph it for the form. And the man got so upset behind the counter that he started calling security, told me I wasn't allowed to photograph the cake. And I was like, what are you talking about? And so I imagined that they were going to arrest me for photographing this birthday cake. And they were on the phone and they were so upset. So this is the whole story about almost getting arrested for photographing a cake and photographing milk in Publix. Like I was going to give the secrets to Winn-Dixie or something. So this one's called Light the Candles. And this was like this whole colorway. I found these leftover colors from Home Depot, and they were pink and orange and blue, and I thought I got to figure out how to make this work. So this is another one from that series, Make a Wish. Same colors. That one was stolen also. And this one I sold from the same series. It's called For You. And the idea of the birthday series was about, it wasn't about your birthday. It was about every day is your birthday. I was experiencing a lot of death in my life, so my concept was, if you look at every day that you're born again every day, like I'm here now today, today. So it was about celebrating life. And I researched birthday cakes to see the origin. And what I learned was that the Romans used to light big bonfires and throw honey cake into the bonfires and make wishes. And that's where this whole ritual began thousands of years ago. And it developed into fire and cakes and wishes. And I thought it was interesting to see how that all began. But you can see it's house paint, and it's layers and layers and layers. And you can see the furniture painting influence with this kind of thing. Okay, so this is the Chinatown series. I was Art at Basel, and the first year they had Asia there. I was looking at that work, and I was just like, this work is so tight. It's so tight and stylized. I wonder if I could do that with house paint. So I started doing this series and coming up with ideas for imagery. And in Chinese, behind them in the prayer flags, it says happy birthday in Chinese. And this is like a family, like a Chinese mother and the boy with the rabbit ears, it's his birthday, but the little girl is fussy, so they gave her spaghetti and milk for a snack. So it was just, I just wanted to do something playful. Here is Duck, Duck, Goose, another one in the Chinatown series. And the narrative on this is that that's his pet goose, and there's dead ducks hanging in the window in Chinatown. So this guy doesn't want his goose to be upset. So he's trying to hide him from this reality that they're being eaten for food. I really had fun with this series because I tried to compress the elements of what Chinatown would mean to me. Because having grown up as a little child in New York and my mother taking us to Chinatown, and what I think of is these dark reds, these charcoals, these ambers. So I only allowed myself to use 4 quarts of house paint, all in those colors. And I stopped doing Chinatown as soon as I ran out of paint. And so this one is called Duck, Duck, Goose. And all these sold. They were very popular. I did like 40 little ones and sold them. And then I did these maiden ones, but they all sold. Here's one that's called Catting Around. And this is like trick-or-treating in New York when I was a child. So they're all wearing their costumes. And I loved learning all these Chinese figures. And these are 3 more Chinatown: Craving, School Zone, where the sign imitates her hat. And that's called the Pet Shop. And the pet shop is like a big painting, so you're standing there, you're the shopkeeper, and you're adding up her purchases on an abacus, and she's got yen on the table, and she's probably buying fish food or something. But I had seen these really appalling pictures of a pet shop in Chinatown that was clustered with cages with all these birds, and it influenced me to do this piece. So it has opposing influences, like the caged animals with the child's joy of getting the fish in the bowl. It's a dichotomy of our lives. It's always like that. You know, there's these horrible things we're doing that we don't know. And I think as we progress, there are more things that we wouldn't even think were horrible. Like in the 50s when we used to throw garbage out the window and didn't think anything of it. You know, now we think, or drink Coca-Cola all day. And now we drink water and we don't throw garbage on the street. So all these things are dichotomies of awareness, a lot of these things. Okay, so there is a show in Fort Lauderdale called The Red Eye, and it's a South African concept, a very edgy show. So I had been in it once or twice, but all the work was good and edgy, and they had performance art and all the stuff. It was the biggest event they had of the year. So I went up to the director, his name was Byron, and I said, Byron, I have an idea for The Red Eye. He goes, well, what is it? I said, I want to build a gallery inside the gallery. I want to take grid walls and make it look like I have my own gallery, a building inside your building, and I'm going to fill it with art, and I'm going to sell out of my building and ignore your show. And he says, okay, do it. So I borrowed their grid walls, and I hooked them together, and I covered all the walls with brown paper. I did a cutout cardboard to make that front and back. I made openings so you can come in from 2 sides. And I produced 250 pieces of art to sell for $5 each and called it the Pick and Pay Gallery $5 Gallery. And I stood there and I said, I'm Joann Nava, I'm living the dream, I have a gallery and I sell art. And it was really funny. And I sold like 150 pieces in an hour and a half. I mean, people were buying 3 and 4 and framing them in groups. And I mean, and it was so easy to do because I was doing things like tar fossil, where I took these rubber animals I found at the thrift shop that were really realistic, and I set them on a brown piece of paper and sprayed them with black paint so they looked like fossils of animals, and those were pieces. And then I would label them like a scientist, 0001, and make up scientific names. So it looked like this collection of fossilized creatures. On the outside, I was painting these images on cardboard. People bought them and framed them. The director bought 2 and shadow boxed them. They looked really like contemporary art. On the other side, I took styrofoam trays and I drew images on them and did block prints, like I used to do with first grade kids, because you don't want them carving linoleum. You let them do the impression in styrofoam. So I was doing styro prints, selling those. I had tons of them. So this was a big success, and it was a very playful thing. And there was a filmmaker there, and he stayed outside. So this is actually online. If you look up Joann Nava Pick and Pay Gallery, they did a movie of the whole event of me selling art. Because everybody, it was such a happening. People were coming in, I go, and then when I'd be at openings after that, people would say to me, I collect Nava. And it would be because they had bought these $5 pieces. It was like ridiculous. It's like I created a myth out of garbage, you know? It's like, it was very fun though. It was very fun. So here's a show a friend of mine and I did with Purvis Young. We called it Urban Dwellers. It was the last show Purvis Young ever did. I made this postcard that had an example of each of our work. I didn't know how to cut and paste, so I literally printed out things, cut with a scissor and pasted, and then had a printmaker make them. And it was really a thrill to show with Purvis Young, his very last exhibition. This is Primitives and Cityscapes. This one is called Shoveling with Boo. It's a big piece, like 4 feet high. It's done in cassine, so when you get close to it, it's all this details and layering. It's really one of my favorite paintings of my life. And once again, I entered Tri-County. I was so afraid I wasn't going to get in. All 3 of my pieces got in. 2 of them got awards, and this one sold. So I'm at the opening, and I realized I had underpriced this a little bit. So I go up to the director, and I go, I think I underpriced Shoveling with Boo. And he goes, well, it already sold. So I tried to buy it back, and I knew that they liked another piece, and it's Gregory Little and his partner Ken. And Gregory Little's like one of the most phenomenal artists in South Florida, and he collects my work, which is thrilling. And they like this elephant piece, which you will see soon. So I would write the messages on Facebook, if you want the elephants, I'd be totally willing to trade you for Shoveling with Boo. And they kept ignoring me. And I'd write again, oh, by the way, you know, that Shoveling with Boo piece. And so they told a friend of mine, a mutual friend, they said, tell Joanne she's never getting that piece back. So it was like, I was like, oh. So this piece, I borrowed it back for the Coral Springs retrospective. So I had it in my bedroom for like 2 nights looking like, I got you now, I got you, you know? So it's when you look at it close, like everything is like almost 3-dimensional raised, and there's so many layers of paint on it. It's almost like an enamel. It reads much better in person, but it just emerged out of me, once again, children's book illustration. This kind of style would be wonderful in a children's book.
Joanne, about how big is that?
Like 4.5 feet by 3. It's a pretty big piece. This was a series I started doing, in case scenes. I wanted to try simplifying. It's sort of a takeoff on some of the other things I was doing. It was called Cityscapes. This one's Suey House. Virginia Fivefold's husband bought this one, so they have this one also. I like this one a lot because it was more about the fields of color, and I wanted to see how far I could reduce it and still get a read on creating an atmosphere. And I was really starting to enjoy doing all those characters, which really do mean something, but usually it means turnips 5 cents. They don't relate. My characters don't really relate to what they're saying, but I love this one. This is another one called Bridge. I just sold that recently. And this one's called Nava Shoes. And I love this one. And you can see the little piece of the shoe store here, and it starts to say Nava Shoes. And it's at night. And my family owned Nava Shoes in the Bronx for 50 years. It was a famous shoe store. And it was on the corner. And they sold Stride Right shoes to all the Catholic schools. And they sold Wayenberg and Masajic, really good shoes. I was never allowed to wear bad shoes because my grandfather was a cobbler. So I did this like you were at Nava Shoes at night when the streets were empty. And my family really responded to this. They were like, that's Nava Shoes? They thought I would go more detailed, but it was like this moody thing because now Nava Shoes isn't there anymore. So it's like a ghost of Nava Shoes. Okay, so here we go to Living Treasure series. I started traveling. Pardon me?
I said the work, the portrait is just lovely.
It's house paint on canvas.
Really?
And I never got a good photo of it because I had run out. I usually use like a water-based poly satin. I had run out of everything. So I said, well, I want to seal this with something, this house paint. So I found a jar of Futura floor wax. I said, oh, that'll work. So I put it on there, and it was so freaking shiny that no matter who photographed it, because I always had my work professionally photographed, it always had a hot spot. Okay, so there's a good story with this. I connected with an old friend of mine from college, and it turned out he had a resort on a national park in northern Minnesota. And I was going up there all the time to Voyageurs National Park and staying up there, and I opened a business up there because I was there in the summers, and people thought I was there all the time because in the winter up there it's 50 below zero, nobody sees anybody. So they thought I lived there. I said, hey, Joanne, how are you doing? So I found a shop in International Falls, and I painted furniture, and I brought it there with moose on it and wild berries, and they went nuts for it. So she started repping me, and I started doing little milk paint boxes of wildlife, and it was a beautiful store. And they did a radio show about my work immediately, and they were selling, and I could justify writing off these trips on my taxes because I actually had started a whole nother business in International Falls. Well, then you come to Laverne Overson. Laverne Overson was already in his 90s. He's 93 here. And he was a fishing guide up there, and he was very well known. He weighed about 80 pounds. He was half of my size. He made me feel like a Goliath to hang out with him. And he always stunk, and he didn't shave because he was so old, and he was taking care of his bedridden wife. And he was so part of that community, and he was such a hero. He was a fishing guide. He was a fishing guide for Harry Truman. He was a bush pilot, and he took little planes into the bush, and he never had a pilot's license. During World War II, they sent them to the Aleutian Islands to teach people how to deal with extreme cold weather. And I became good friends with Laverne. So the last time I was up there, I said to him, I want to go fishing with you. So he took me fishing on his very last fishing trip. And he drove the boat. It made everybody a nervous wreck because it was a big boat. We thought he was going to bump into things. He's putting worms on my hook. And I'm catching things like crazy because it's Laverne. He's like a famous fishing guy. He goes, wow, I like that you catch fish. I go, yeah, right. Yeah, okay, so you're handing me fish. So before I left, I just had this feeling that I had to photograph him. So he would grow these trees from saplings. He would just, all over his property were these trees. He would take the trees when they got to a certain size and he would hand carve these oars. And he would just do them from the trees he grew, and they were beautiful, and he would sell them for like $100 a piece. Well, he made me an oar, and he wrote my name on it, to Joanne, blah, 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 and the date, and I still have the oar. So I took this, and I did this portrait of him as a tribute, because I didn't want him to ever be forgotten. He was such a special man, and I just loved him. And he stayed alive for a while, but when I did the portrait, I wanted to do all the oars, and I have a photo of him with all the oars that this resembles. But I had seen a painting by John Patrick Kelly called The Coat. And it was a portrait of his mother wearing a coat at night with stars. So I copied Patrick Kelly's composition and put in my subject. And when Patrick Kelly saw this painting, he goes, oh, I love that painting. I go, well, you should. I ripped you off, you know? So this is Laverne. So when I did this, it just struck me that here I was at the time, in my 50s, and here's this guy in his 90s, and he's still guiding, he's still fishing, he's taking me out, he's flirting with me, and he's 93 years old, and I'm worried about getting old. So I started realizing that there were people in their 90s that were still living their dream. So I did a series called Living Treasures. Katie Dietz wrote a story about it for a Palm Beach art paper, and she named it the Living Treasure series, which I thought was brilliant. They gave me a solo show at Fort Lauderdale City Hall with this series. This is Kettle Falls. Laverne was very much a part of this. This is on an island, on a barrier island right off of Capitogama. And it was a whorehouse for lumberjacks back in the day. And now it's part of the park system. And it can only get there by float plane or boat. So every year when I go to Minnesota, I say, I want to go to Kettle Falls. I want to go to Kettle Falls. There's a waterfall there, and the wood floor is wavy like this, so they had to adjust all the furniture. I want to go to Kettle Falls. So finally, we had to take a boat, and we had to figure out how to get there, and the weather had to be right. So we took a boat, and we went there. I did this photograph because everybody painted it from a distance. I wanted you to feel like you were standing right next to it. It's a big painting, and it was very tricky for me to accomplish. This is Ag and Ed. They met at 80. Got married. I was their maid of honor. I took this photo with them at 93. They were married. She's still alive. She's 102. It's a huge painting. It's like 5 feet or 6 feet. Okay, so I went to Fort Lauderdale Museum of Art, and they had a show called the Gee's Bend Quilters. And I had never heard of these quilters, so they were discovered in the 90s in Gee's Bend, Alabama. I walked into the museum, and the hair stood up on end. I was like almost in tears because the work was so magnificent. These quilts were made out of slave clothes and cotton picking clothes. And a few of the quilters had the ability to create abstract quilt designs that could rival Paul Klee. They were just gorgeous. And they had narratives, and they were textured, and they were old cloth. And I could talk on and on about them, but my friend who lived in northern Minnesota, who I was visiting all the time, he said to me, we're going to do a road trip to northern Minnesota in my truck. I said, I'm not going unless you take me to Gee's Bend. I have to meet the quilters. So he said, okay, okay. So we stopped in Alabama. We had to take a ferry to where they were. I went to their store, looked at the quilt. I said, who's the oldest quilter here? They said, that would be Allie Petway. She's 93. I go, imagine that. So I said, can I meet her? They said, sure, she's in the workroom having her lunch. So they took me over to the workroom. And I hung out with her, and I photographed her. That's her. That's what she was wearing. And I photographed the surroundings. That's what it really looks like there. And that's with the flowers. They had cosmos growing wild everywhere. And this is a big painting. So I looked up online, and I found that one of her quilts was in a gallery in New York where Robert De Niro shows and everything, and this was the quilt. So I copied it photographically accurate. This is the quilt she made that's showing in New York. These are 2 more quilts by 2 other Gee's Bend quilters that are also in New York galleries. So I copied them like If you look them up, they're identical. I was so careful because I wanted you to feel like you could enter right into that painting like an animation and be at G's Bend. So I sent them photos of the painting and I blogged about it a little. So I've been getting letters from the Petways relatives saying, that's our grandmother, we want the painting, or we want a print of the painting. So we had been messaging on the thing, and then the other night, one of them called me on the phone, they found my number. And she said, you know, I'm her granddaughter. I said, well, what size do you want? She goes, well, we want small ones so we can frame them. And I said, okay. I said, how about we talk to the Mobile Museum of Art where your family's quilts are hanging and tell them that we want this to hang, a portrait of your grandmother, so it's forever. And they said, okay, we're going to work on that. And I said, I'll give you the files so you can make as many prints as you want. You can always have them. These are really good. You can make good G-clays out of this. So that's what I'm working on, because really what my goal is to be in as many permanent collections as possible as I get older. Because when I sell paintings, you get the money and then blah. You know, that's it. But so to go back to, that's the thing with that. Now I'm going to tell you one more story. This one and this one were both acquired by the Department of the Interior. Rainy Lake in Voyageurs National Park built a new visitor center, and they asked me if they could permanently put these paintings to commemorate Laverne and Kettle Falls. So these paintings are now permanently installed in the new visitor center in Rainy Lake, Minnesota, which is to me so exciting. So I'm there. And this one I want to get it to Mobile. Okay, so here's my elephants that I wanted to trade for shoveling with Boo. And this painting, I was going to do a show with a friend of mine that did circus things, and my original idea, which you guys are going to be horrified, was to do a Thomas Edison piece when he executed Topsy. And I don't know if you realize this, but when Tesla and Thomas Edison were fighting about electricity, what kind to use, Edison, in order to prove that the kind we use is better, decided that Topsy, this elephant on Coney Island, had killed somebody, and he figured he'd electrocute her, like create an electric carrier to kill the elephant. So he put all these electric things all over her and actually electrocuted the elephant and made a film of it. And it's one of the first films. So I was going to do a painting of that. And my friend was so horrified by the idea because she's very gentle and she thought it was cruel to even look at that image. But I was trying to say something about the progression, like what I was saying before. Everybody thought Edison was such a hero, but there was no consciousness about this elephant that, yeah, it went rogue, but you don't give it a cruel death. It was just awful. So I was trying to make a point. But instead, I went to a more gentle story, and this is about circus elephants. And this is sort of a tribute to Hopper, but it's really what happens when they move the elephants in the city. They move them in the middle of the night when everybody's asleep. So I wanted you to feel like, and this is a very dark painting. In real life, you can't see it this well. But it's like you can just hear their feet just gently going on the pavement. And they're walking through the streets, and everybody's totally unaware that a whole string of elephants is going right down the street. So that was the fantasy with that piece. And that leads right into this wildlife sanctification series. I had a lot of things going on, and I had this concept of peace be with you. It's like a sharing of the peace that I had seen done in all kinds of churches, and I thought it was an interesting idea. And this image is from Hagia Sophia in Turkey, and it was a fragment that had fallen off the original temple, and each one represented an apostle. So I saw these images of these lambs, just broken pieces, and I wanted to recreate them in cassine on wood. And it was really hard for me because it's a big piece and the cassines are hard to control. If you see it in real life, it's a million little cracks because of the layers of grays and whites. It's all done in grays and whites, and then I stained it. I hung ropes on it and antique bells like lambs would wear, and it's in the show. But it's 80 inches long. I really love this piece, but it was tricky for me. This is another one from that series. It's called Blueberry Swallows. And again, it's like a dance of unity and peace and about how animals, how they're always in a state of grace. This whole show, also I did the show, I had a solo, and I did the show and I dedicated it to my friend in Minnesota because he had just died and he was all about wildlife. And we did all these things together in northern Minnesota and picked berries in the woods and did all these wonderful things. So I dedicated this wildlife show to him. This is another one of the lambs, single lamb. Bonnie has that one, Bonnie Shapiro. This is Lamb Chair. Someone wrote me on my thing and asked me if the lamb image represented Jesus, and I said, not really. It's about the holiness of life, really. Even though originally the reference was a Christian reference, I wanted it to be more than that. And here's Descent of the Frigate. Now, a lot of these are things from my Audubon days. Remember when I was doing all those Audubons, and I took a lot of these images from Audubon and then reinterpreted them. So I wanted this whole series to look like a collection that was found in an old church building from like the late 1700s, early 1800s. I wanted it to be like somebody found all these pieces. So they're all done with old frames, old wood, and the whole series looks like this. So this is from the Bad Children, Blessed Beasts series, and this is called Crow Funeral. And it's casein that I made with pigments on wood. It's a big piece, like 50-something inches. And I was reading a book, and it talked about how crows actually have funerals. That when one of their flock falls and dies, they gather around it to say a goodbye or a tribute, and it affects them. And then as years went by, it became more and more common knowledge that crows are very intelligent animals, like chimpanzees and things like that, that they have a conscience and that they're aware and they have interaction and they recognize faces, and they have, you know, they reward you for being kind to them. They leave you trinkets, and they're really fascinating creatures. This was on wood. It's like a tribute to Minnesota, and that's a little trompe-l'oeil paper taped to this, an old wood door. Like I said, I use things that are thrown away. And the paper, on the paper is a prayer for restoring the earth that I found. And it's all about restoring the earth to its original condition. Okay, so I moved to Lake Worth, and I meet Joyce Brown, and I start working in her studio. And one of my passions my whole life was Mimbres pottery and ancient American pottery. And I even lived out in the Southwest. I went to New Mexico to research the Mimbres Indians and to find their pottery. I have shards at home. My house, I have these relics. So I decided I'm going to make fakes of this pottery that I can't afford once again. So Joyce instructs me on how I can make slump bowls and this and that. And so I started making this whole collection of what I called ancient impersonations. And then I noticed that some other people at the studio were making them as well. Like Tony Eston makes these beautiful, I said, you're making Mimbres pottery? He goes, yeah. And I didn't even know anybody knew about those Indians. I said, do you want to do an ancient impersonation show with me? He said, yes. So he got in. And then I noticed that Nancy Costello is doing jewelry that looks like it's from Atlantis or something, or some other culture, or Tibet. And I'm thinking, do you want to be an ancient impersonation? She goes, sure. And then I see Simone Clooney is doing these pit-fired goddesses that are gorgeous, and they're, I mean, I said, do you want to be in the show? She goes, sure. So then we have this whole show, Ancient Impersonation, and I decided to make it look like a dig. And so each of us had a photo that Christine Ellinghausen took, and I wanted the photos to look like they were documentation of the dig site. So we did them in black and white. So every artist had a photo in black and white over their pieces. And we made it look like they were tagged by scientists and that they were being packed and ready to be shipped to the museum. And it was called Ancient Impersonations. It was so much fun to do. We want to do it again, but it means we have to make more work, which is a whole other issue. So here's a close-up of some of my pieces for Ancient Impersonations. But I love them. I've sold some of them, but those I have at home, I don't want to sell them. So. Okay, so then we go to the sculptures that are in Bad Children, Blessed Beasts. This particular one is called Walk the Plank. And I made these pieces out of clay slab, and mice just seem to emerge into this. I don't plan these things. I start making something, and then it tells me what it wants next. The drawer is open ajar, and there's a mouse trap, a white mouse trap for each of those mice in the drawer. So the concept behind this is that the mice are aware of the traps. So they blindfold the guy, and they're making him walk the plank. It's like a battle between wildlife and man, done in a whimsical children's book kind of way, but it's still. So this was the first one I was doing in the series, and this is when it was in clay form. I have the hands I was going to put on him, and that's the head. This is going to be Mouse Boy, but I wanted you to see how it looked in wet clay and then see where it ends up. There he is when he's finished. So I had mice on his shoulder, mice on his chest, And then I was using different things for bases and painted mice on here, and I put a fork in his hand because I wanted you to wonder if he's going to eat the mice, is the mice eating his food? And my friend Don, again, I'm going to go back to my mentor, when he had moved to New York to pursue his art, he was living in Manhattan, and he was renting this apartment that was like downstairs underground, little tiny room with pipes running through it. And he said it was infested with mice. And so I said, so what did you do? He said, well, it was okay, but then one morning I woke up and there were baby mice in my pajama pockets. And he goes, that was enough. So I put the mouse in the pocket to make him smile. It's like a tribute for my friend. Because I thought it was so funny that to wake up in the morning and to find mice in your pockets is like an odd kind of image. So I named this guy Mouse Boy. This one is my favorite. It's Dunce Girl. And when these pieces, it's all clay, except for I found these bases and refinished them. I figured out that the neck of these children is a size 4 children's. So I would buy children's shirts, cut off the collar, paint it, and make it like the clay. So it ends up being a multimedia piece. I paint them with milk paints and caseins. So that finish is all done with caseins and rubbing, and just like I used to redo furniture. When the clay is wet, I put holes in the eyelids of all of them. And that way I can insert individual hairs so they have real eyelashes. So when you're up next to them with their eyes closed, it feels like they could open their eyes at any moment. And even some of the hair, like that's clay hair, but I also have slipped in some real hair next to the clay so you don't know when it's going to fall. And real buttons, of course. These are 2 of my favorite paintings. They're called the Ghost series. I had more, they sold, they're gone. That one's called Upbeat Downbeat. This is called Cheer Lady. I want to get back to that kind of a look, but this is also was in my Bad Children, Blessed Beast series. Here is, I did a portrait of Dunce Girl on wood in casein and decided to have the mice running around the wood on the painting, so I made them out of ceramic. The frame, I work at frame shops for a part-time job, and this frame was from Sotheby's. It was 18th century. It had a primitive in it, and they didn't want the frame, so I took it and redid it. And then these are my favorite sculptures. They're called Dunce Girls Do Nothing. And they're girls with no arms sitting in chairs. And it's just the thing about young girls who don't pursue anything, or just, and it doesn't mean it's good or bad. It might be good that they do nothing, but it just says Dunce Girls Do Nothing. Here's a close-up of them. And they're hollow. All the sculptures are hollow. I'm thinking I started working on more of the dunce image, and the new series is going to go towards Ignorance is Bliss. This is the show at the Cultural Council that I had, and this photograph's from Adriano Ficcarelli. I love the photos he took of this show. This one is called Mr. Rat Comes to Tea, another sculpture I did. And the rat has individual hairs for the fur. I take boar bristles from a paintbrush and I cut them and I hand insert each one. And the tail and the feet are rubber from a rubber toy, and I had put holes in the clay so that I could epoxy them in later. So it gives it a real odd kind of feeling to it. And the girl's hair I made out of rope from Home Depot and shredded it and put it on. And she has real eyelashes. You can see them in her face and teeth and everything. And those are the hands you saw originally. I ended up bolting them to the size of that box and gave her hands. But I like her. There's another picture by Adriano that I love the angle. You see the crow funeral behind it. I wanted to show you some of these photos so that you can see how the show looks as an installation. Now we come to the retrospective. This is what's showing at Coral Springs Museum right now. And this is how you enter. It was pretty thrilling. This is as you come in the first room. You see the birthday party. Different friends of mine photographed this show. This is Don Shearer's version. I like the way the shadows read on the wall. And the cake, I made it out of clay, of course. This one is called Hole in the Head. And there's holes in the skull that you can't see here. But if you look in the skull, the mice are climbing in there. There's 2 holes. And there's a ladder inside the skull. So the mice can go in and out at will. And you can see the hairs coming out. Here they are on an altar in front of the, this is how it looks at Coral Springs Museum right now. So it says, do this in remembrance of me. And then you have the 3 heads. I like them together. This is Mouse Boy. This piece is an older piece. It's from my original milk show called Cheerios and Milk. It's casein on wood. Okay, so here we are at the dollhouse. I did this like 15 years ago. I started working with this house that I found at a yard sale and put it together, and my husband helped me do baseboards, and we got furniture and redid it and scaled it. And the photos are photos from my original house I lived in when I was in my 20s. And I said to Ellie and Jerry, I said, because they came to my house and they saw the house, and I had hand painted the shadows. I had cast the light in there, and the shadows are hand painted. They're gray, they're not real. Some are real, some are not, but all these shadows, I shot a pin light, reached my hand in there and hand painted the shadows on the wall. But when Ellie and Jerry saw it, I said I never was happy with it because my intent was always to put a tape recorder underneath and have sound effects, like you could hear the water dripping in the sink, you could hear the clock ticking. And Jerry said, well, I can do that. And so we started working on it. And when we got closer to the end of it, because he's an engineer and he had a speaker isolated for each portion, where I was just going to have one loop tape, because no. You have to isolate the sound so it's realistic. So he researched how to do this. And then he said, you have one more channel left and it can be visual. He goes, you want to have shadows going up the stairs? I said, how about a working television? He goes, okay, let's look into it. So we got a 1.5-inch flat screen TV and put it in a TV cabinet and have it playing. Here's some more of the inside of the dollhouse with the shadow. See how the shadow is hand painted? That's not a real shadow. All those shadows are hand painted, which was kind of fun. There's the TV. The honeymooners are playing on it, right?
Jackie Gleason, The Honeymooners, with the stars Art Carney, Audrey Meadows, and Joyce Randolph.
So I think that's the end of the story.